A boy entered the church desperately and interrupted his father's wedding. What he shouted in the middle of the church left everyone in shock. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Manhattan apartment, stretching across the wooden floor. Ethan sat cross-legged on his bed, gripping a worn photo of his mother, Clara. Her smile in the picture was soft, full of warmth that he could almost feel, even now. But that warmth had been missing for 2 years, replaced by the cold emptiness her absence left behind. Ethan's golden retriever, Toby, lay quietly at his feet, as if sensing his owner's mood. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but inside the apartment, there was only silence. "Ethan, breakfast's ready." Adam, his father, called from the kitchen. Ethan sighed and placed the photo back on the nightstand before shuffling out of bed. Toby followed close behind, his tail swishing slowly. In the kitchen, Adam was pouring himself coffee, dressed in one of his usual navy suits. His sharp, polished appearance felt at odds with the exhaustion etched into his features. Ethan slid into his seat at the table, where a bowl of cereal and a glass of juice waited. "Morning," Adam said, his voice light but hesitant. "Morning," Ethan muttered, poking at his cereal without much interest. Adam sat down across from him, folding his hands together. "Listen, there's something we need to talk about," he began. Ethan frowned. His father's tone was serious, almost nervous. "You know how Isabel and I have been spending a lot of time together," Adam said, carefully watching Ethan's reaction. Ethan's frown deepened. Of course, he knew. Isabel had been coming over for months, laughing too loudly at Adam's jokes, leaving her things scattered around the apartment, and talking to Ethan like she was his babysitter instead of an intruder in their lives. "Well," Adam continued, "we've decided to get married." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan froze, his spoon hovering above his cereal. "Married," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. Adam smiled faintly, clearly trying to soften the blow. "I know this is a big change, Ethan. But Isabel really cares about both of us. She's been amazing, and I think this could be a fresh start for our family." "She's not family," Ethan shot back, his voice trembling with anger. Toby whined softly at his feet. "Ethan, I know this is hard for you," Adam said, his tone firm but understanding. "But we need to move forward. It's what your mom would have wanted." Ethan pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know what Mom would have wanted," he muttered before storming out of the kitchen. Back in his room, Ethan collapsed onto his bed, his face buried in his pillow. Toby jumped up beside him, curling against his side. Ethan clung to the dog, the anger in his chest giving way to a deep, aching sadness. Later that afternoon, Ethan slipped out of the apartment to visit Mrs. Whitaker, their elderly neighbor. Her door was always open, and her cozy living room smelled of lavender and freshly baked cookies. Mrs. Whitaker, a widow in her 70s, had a kind, wrinkled face and an endless supply of wisdom that Ethan found strangely comforting. "Ethan, dear," she exclaimed when she saw him. Come in, come in. I just made some oatmeal raisin cookies, you'll have to tell me if they're too dry." Ethan managed a small smile as he settled into his usual spot on her floral-patterned couch. Toby trotted in behind him, immediately curling up by the fireplace. Mrs. Whitaker handed him a cookie and took a seat beside him. "What's on your mind, sweetheart? You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." "My dad's getting married," Ethan said flatly. Mrs. Whitaker blinked, surprised. "Married? To that woman who's been coming around?" "Isabel," Ethan confirmed. "She's... I don't like her. Something about her just feels wrong." Mrs. Whitaker tilted her head thoughtfully. "Sometimes people hide who they really are, Ethan. If your gut is telling you something's off, you should pay attention to it." Ethan stared at the floor, her words swirling in his mind. He had already picked up on little things about Isabel, the way she always seemed to find reasons to keep his dad too busy to spend time with him, or how her smiles never quite reached her eyes when she looked at him. "Do you think my dad sees it?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Whitaker gave a sad smile. Love can make people blind to a lot of things. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't trust your instincts. Just be careful, Ethan. He nodded, her advice settling like a stone in his chest. He didn't know how, but he was sure of one thing: he had to figure out the truth about Isabel before it was too late. A week after Adam's announcement, the apartment was buzzing with preparations. Isabel was over more often than ever, taking charge of every detail, from flower arrangements to guest lists. She moved through the space like she owned it, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she issued instructions to a wedding planner. Ethan lingered in the doorway to the living room, watching her. She wore a sleek dress that seemed more suited for a cocktail party than a casual visit. Her laughter, too loud and too frequent, grated on his nerves. "You'll love the centerpieces, Adam," she cooed, flashing him a smile. "They're elegant but understated. Exactly what we need for a wedding in the city." Adam smiled warmly, clearly charmed. Ethan rolled his eyes. Isabel's voice alone was enough to make him want to retreat to his room, but he forced himself to stay. As the planner packed up and left, Isabel noticed Ethan watching. Her expression softened into something that was supposed to look kind but felt fake. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "why don't you come sit with us? We can talk about how you'd like to be involved in the ceremony." "I don't want to be involved," Ethan replied flatly. Adam shot him a warning glance, but Isabel just laughed. "You're such a serious young man," she said, as though his resistance amused her. "That's okay. I know this is a big change for you. We'll figure it out together." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, Toby trailing faithfully behind him. Back in his room, he flopped onto his bed, frustration bubbling inside him. How could his dad not see through Isabel? That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Toby snored softly at the foot of the bed, his golden fur glowing faintly in the moonlight. Ethan's mind raced with memories of the times Isabel had brushed him off, dismissed his feelings, or subtly suggested that Adam send him to a boarding school to focus on himself. Each incident was small on its own, but together they painted a picture Ethan couldn't ignore. Isabel wanted him out of the way. The next day, Ethan found himself knocking on Mrs. Whitaker's door again. She greeted him with her usual warm smile and ushered him inside. "Cookies again?" she asked, motioning to the tray on the counter. Ethan shook his head. "No, thanks. I needed to get out of there." Mrs. Whitaker sat down in her armchair, looking at him with concern. "What happened?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "It's Isabel. She's planning everything like it's her house, her family. She even tried to act like she wanted my opinion, but I know she doesn't care what I think." Mrs. Whitaker nodded slowly. "Have you told your dad how you feel?" "He doesn't listen. He just says I need to give her a chance." Mrs. Whitaker leaned back, her gaze distant. "Your father wants to believe this will fix things. Losing your mother was hard on him too, even if he doesn't show it the same way you do. But you don't have to accept someone in your life just because they want you to." Ethan frowned. "How do I make him see that?" Mrs. Whitaker smiled gently. "Sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself, Ethan. You just have to keep your eyes open and be ready when the moment comes." Ethan didn't fully understand what she meant, but her words stayed with him. Over the next week, he began paying closer attention to Isabel. He noticed the way she spoke to his dad when she thought no one was listening, always steering the conversation toward herself, always hinting at how much she had sacrificed to make their relationship work. One afternoon, while Isabel was out running errands, Ethan had the apartment to himself. With Toby at his side, he wandered into the guest room Isabel used when she stayed over. The room was spotless, just like the rest of the apartment, but something felt off. Ethan opened a drawer in the nightstand and found a small leather-bound journal. He hesitated, then flipped through it, but the pages were blank. His fingers brushed something tucked between the back cover and the binding, a passport. Ethan pulled it out, his heart racing. The name on the passport wasn't Isabel Davis, the name she'd given them. It was Sofia Martinez. The photo was unmistakably Isabel, but her dark hair was styled differently, and her expression was colder. "What the?" Ethan whispered, staring at the document. Toby whined softly, sensing his unease. Ethan snapped a photo of the passport with his phone and quickly returned it to its hiding place. His mind raced with questions. Why was she using a fake name? What else was she hiding? That evening, Ethan sat through dinner in silence, the passport's image burned into his mind. Isabel chatted cheerfully about wedding details while Adam nodded along, completely oblivious. Ethan felt a swell of determination. Mrs. Whittaker was right, sometimes the truth revealed itself. And now that he had a glimpse of it, he was going to find out everything. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the passport. Every time Isabel entered the room, smiling as though she had nothing to hide, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He was sure of one thing now: she wasn't who she said she was. But proving it would be the hard part. One afternoon, when Isabel had gone out to meet a florist, Ethan decided to take action. Armed with the photo of her passport he had taken, he sat at his computer and began his search. He typed "Sofia Martinez" into the search bar, feeling a pang of guilt for snooping but pushing it aside. The results were overwhelming: random profiles, irrelevant links, but nothing concrete. Hours passed, and just as Ethan was about to give up, a news article caught his eye: Florida woman wanted for real estate fraud vanishes before trial. Ethan clicked on it, his heart pounding. The article, dated 3 years earlier, described how a woman named Sofia Martinez had been accused of scamming families by selling them fake properties. When her scheme unraveled, she fled before her court date, leaving behind victims and unpaid debts. The article included a photo. Ethan stared at it, his stomach dropping. Though the hairstyle was different and the expression colder, there was no mistaking it: this was Isabel. Ethan's hands shook as he read the rest of the article. Sofia Martinez, now calling herself Isabel, had built a new life with lies. And now, she was trying to pull his dad into her web. That evening, Ethan couldn't focus on anything else. He barely touched his dinner, glancing at Isabel every time she spoke. She seemed so casual, laughing and joking with Adam as though nothing was wrong. "Everything okay, Ethan?" she asked suddenly, her voice sweet but probing. Ethan stiffened. "Yeah, I'm fine." Her eyes lingered on him, her smile faltering just slightly. For a moment, Ethan wondered if she could sense his suspicion. But then she turned her attention back to Adam, and Ethan exhaled. After dinner, Ethan made his way to Mrs. Whittaker's apartment. He needed to talk to someone who would believe him. Mrs. Whittaker greeted him with her usual warmth, ushering him inside and offering him a cookie. But her smile faded as soon as she saw the tension on his face. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked, sitting beside him on the couch. Ethan hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed her the article. "It's Isabel," he said, his voice low. "Her real name is Sofia Martinez. She's been lying to my dad, and probably to everyone else." Mrs. Whittaker adjusted her glasses, studying the screen carefully. Her brow furrowed deeper with each passing second. "This is serious," she said finally, handing the phone back. "You have to tell your father." "I tried before," Ethan muttered. "He doesn't listen. He thinks I'm just being difficult because I don't like her." Mrs. Whittaker nodded slowly. "That's not uncommon. When people are in love, they don't always see things clearly. But if this woman is dangerous, your father needs to know. You need to show him proof." "I don't have enough yet," Ethan admitted. "The article helps, but what if she just says it's not her? I need something else, something she can't explain away." Mrs. Whittaker leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "Well, if that's the case, you'll have to keep digging. But be careful, Ethan. If she's hiding something this big, she won't want to be exposed." Her warning sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. But as he walked back to his apartment, determination took hold. Isabel, or Sofia, whoever she was, wasn't going to get away with this. Ethan couldn't let the discovery of the passport and Isabel's true name rest. Every interaction with her now felt like a battle of wills, her cheerful facade clashing with his growing suspicions. Yet, Ethan kept quiet, knowing he needed more than a fake ID to convince his father. Late one evening, when Adam was at work and Isabel was in her room planning wedding details, Ethan slipped into his own room and opened his laptop. He began searching for more information on Sofia Martinez. It took hours of sifting through irrelevant profiles and unrelated articles, but finally, he hit something, a Florida-based news article from 3 years ago. The headline jumped out at him: "Real estate scammer Sofia Martinez wanted after disappearing before trial." Ethan clicked on the link, his heart racing. The article detailed a sophisticated scheme where Martinez had sold homes she didn't own, leaving families devastated and without savings. When investigators uncovered her crimes, she vanished before facing the charges. The photo attached to the article was unmistakable. Though her hair was darker, styled in a sleek bob instead of the softer waves she now wore, Ethan could see it was Isabel. He felt a surge of vindication, but also fear. If she was capable of such elaborate lies, what else might she be hiding? The next morning, Ethan went to Mrs. Whitaker's apartment. He needed advice, and she was the only adult he could trust. "Goodness, Ethan," she said, opening the door to his knock. "What's got you so worked up?" Ethan stepped inside, clutching his phone. Toby followed him, wagging his tail as Mrs. Whitaker patted his head. "I found something," Ethan said, sitting on the floral couch. He handed her his phone, showing her the article. Mrs. Whitaker adjusted her glasses and began reading. Her face grew more serious with each line. "Ethan, this is troubling." "And you're certain it's her?" "It's her," Ethan said firmly. "I saw her passport. Her real name is Sofia Martinez." Mrs. Whitaker set the phone down, her expression thoughtful. "You're in a delicate position, Ethan. If you tell your father now, there's a chance he won't believe you, not until he sees it for himself. And if you confront her, you could put yourself in danger." Ethan nodded. He'd thought of both scenarios. "So what do I do?" "You wait," Mrs. Whitaker said gently. "Keep gathering what you can. The truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. But you'll need to be ready for that moment." Her words stayed with Ethan as he returned to his apartment. The idea of waiting felt unbearable, but he knew Mrs. Whitaker was right. If he acted too soon, he risked blowing his chance to expose Isabel for good. Ethan's next move was to pay closer attention to Isabel's behavior. He began noticing patterns he hadn't picked up on before: how she subtly influenced Adam's decisions, always steering him toward things that seemed unnecessary or extravagant. She talked about selling the apartment after the wedding and moving somewhere better suited for their new life together. One afternoon, Ethan overheard Isabel on a phone call in the guest room. Her tone was hushed but sharp, nothing like the cheerful, polished voice she used around Adam. "I told you, it's under control," she said. "I just need a few more weeks. Stop calling me about this." Ethan's stomach turned. He pressed his ear closer to the door, straining to hear more, but she ended the call abruptly. He retreated to his room before she could catch him. That night, Ethan sat with Toby on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His phone lay beside him, filled with photos and screenshots of everything he'd found, enough, he hoped, to finally convince his dad when the time came. For now, he would wait. The wedding was just weeks away, and Ethan knew that the ceremony would be his chance to reveal the truth. If Isabel wanted to play the part of a perfect fiancée, she'd have to do it in front of an audience. And Ethan was ready to pull the curtain back. The church was bustling with activity as Ethan sat stiffly in a pew near the back. Guests milled about, chatting and admiring the elegant decorations Isabel had spent weeks perfecting. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and lilies, the sunlight streaming through stained-glass windows casting colorful patterns on the floor. Ethan felt none of the excitement or joy that surrounded him. His heart raced in his chest, his hands clutching his phone like a lifeline. Today was the day he'd been preparing for, the day Isabel's lies would unravel. Toby wasn't allowed in the church, but Mrs. Whittaker was there, sitting beside him. She gave him a reassuring smile and patted his hand. "Remember, Ethan," she whispered. "Stay calm and let the truth do the work." He nodded, trying to steady his nerves. He scanned the front of the church where Isabel stood, radiant in her white gown. She was laughing softly with Adam, who looked happier than Ethan had seen him in years. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He didn't want to ruin his father's happiness, but he knew that happiness was built on lies. The music swelled, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. The guests found their seats, and Ethan felt the weight of their presence. Every movement, every word he was about to say, would be under their watchful eyes. The ceremony began smoothly. The priest spoke warmly about love and commitment, while Adam and Isabel exchanged glowing looks. Ethan shifted in his seat, the knot in his stomach tightening with each passing moment. When the priest finally reached the familiar question, "If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace," Ethan knew it was time. He stood abruptly, the sound of the pew creaking drawing every pair of eyes in the room. "I object," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Adam turned, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan stepped into the aisle, his phone in hand. "Dad, I can't let you marry her. She's lying to you, to everyone." Isabel's face paled, her confident smile faltering. "Ethan, this isn't the time for jokes," she said, her voice tight. "It's not a joke," Ethan shot back, holding up his phone. "Her name isn't Isabel Davis. It's Sofia Martinez. She's wanted for fraud in Florida." The room fell silent, the tension almost tangible. Adam stared at Ethan, his face a mask of disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "I found her passport," Ethan said, his voice rising. "Her real name, fake IDs, documents showing she's been scamming people for years. Look at this." He walked toward Adam, holding out the phone. Adam took it hesitantly, his brow furrowing as he scrolled through the photos Ethan had collected. This can't be true," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's true," Ethan said. "She was even planning to sell this apartment after the wedding. Everything she's done has been about money. She doesn't love you, Dad. She's just using you." Isabel's mask of composure cracked. "How dare you," she hissed, stepping forward. "Adam, he's just a child. He doesn't understand." "I understand enough," Ethan interrupted. "You were on the phone the other day, telling someone you needed more time. Who were you talking to, Isabel, or should I say, Sofia?" Adam's eyes darted to Isabel, searching her face for answers. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. For a moment, Isabel hesitated. Then her expression hardened. "Fine," she said coldly. "Yes, my name is Sofia. But I've changed, Adam. I left that life behind. I've been nothing but honest with you since we met." "Honest?" Ethan repeated, his voice incredulous. "You've lied about everything." The guests murmured among themselves, the scandal unfolding before their eyes like a soap opera. Adam turned away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the truth. "I trusted you," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Adam," Isabel reached for him, but he stepped back. "No," he said firmly. "I can't do this. The wedding's off." The priest closed his book awkwardly as Isabel stood frozen, her face twisting with anger and disbelief. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and sadness as his father walked away, signaling to the guests that the ceremony was over. Later that evening, Ethan and Adam sat together in their apartment. The space felt quieter than usual, the weight of the day still heavy in the air. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Adam looked at him, his eyes tired but grateful. "Don't be. You saved me from making a huge mistake. I just wish I'd listened to you sooner." Ethan nodded, leaning against his father's shoulder. Toby, sensing the shift in mood, jumped onto the couch and rested his head on Ethan's lap. "We'll get through this," Adam said, placing an arm around Ethan. "Together." Ethan smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they were a team. The days following the cancelled wedding were a blur. News of the dramatic event spread quickly among Adam and Isabel's social circles. Ethan couldn't help but overhear snippets of gossip from neighbors and distant relatives. "Did you hear about the boy exposing her in front of everyone? Can you imagine? A scammer. Poor Adam." Despite the buzz, Ethan was more concerned about how his father was handling everything. Adam spent most of his time at home now, avoiding the office and canceling appointments. He seemed quieter, lost in thought. One evening, Ethan found him sitting on the couch, staring at a framed photo of Clara. It was the same picture Ethan kept in his room, their family, together and smiling, before everything had fallen apart. "Dad?" Ethan said hesitantly, approaching. Adam looked up, startled. "Hey, buddy," he said, managing a faint smile. "What's up?" "I just wanted to check on you," Ethan said, sitting beside him. Toby padded over and curled up at their feet. Adam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been better, to be honest. I feel like such an idiot. I let someone into our lives who almost ruined everything." "It's not your fault," Ethan said firmly. "She was really good at lying. She fooled a lot of people." Adam nodded but didn't seem entirely convinced. "You saw through her, though. I should have listened to you from the start." Ethan hesitated, then said, "You were just trying to be happy again. There's nothing wrong with that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adam set the photo down and turned to Ethan. "You know, I thought moving on would fix everything. But the truth is, I don't need someone new to make this family whole. I already have you. And I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you weren't enough." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "You didn't," he said quietly. "But I'm glad it's just us again." Adam pulled him into a hug, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The next week, Ethan went to visit Mrs. Whitaker, as he often did. He carried a small gift, a framed picture he had drawn of her beloved plants, which she always tended with care. Toby trotted along at his side, tail wagging. When he knocked on her door, there was no answer. Frowning, Ethan knocked again, a little louder. A neighbor across the hall opened their door and gave him a sad look. "Ethan," the man said gently, "Mrs. Whitaker passed away last night. The paramedics came, but there wasn't anything they could do." Ethan felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "She's gone," he whispered. The neighbor nodded. "She always spoke so highly of you. I'm sure she'd be glad you came by." Ethan nodded numbly and made his way back to his apartment. Toby seemed to sense his distress, staying close by his side. That evening, Ethan sat on the floor of his room, the picture he'd drawn for Mrs. Whitaker resting in his lap. Tears welled up in his eyes as he thought of her warm smile and her steady presence. "She always knew what to say," he murmured to Toby, who placed his head in Ethan's lap. Adam knocked softly on the door and entered, sitting beside Ethan. "I heard about Mrs. Whitaker," he said gently. "I'm so sorry, kiddo. I know how much she meant to you." "She was like a grandma," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "She believed me when no one else did. She helped me figure out what to do about Isabel." Adam put an arm around Ethan's shoulders. "She was a special person," he said. "And you made her life brighter, Ethan. I know she was proud of you." Ethan nodded, wiping his tears. He placed the picture on his nightstand as a tribute to her. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Adam worked together to rebuild their lives. They redecorated parts of the apartment, making it feel like a fresh start. Adam returned to work, but he made sure to spend more time with Ethan, keeping the promises they'd made to each other. One evening, Adam surprised Ethan with a trip to the park where they used to go as a family. They brought Toby along, throwing a frisbee for him as the sun set behind the skyline. As they sat on a bench, Adam said, "You know, I think we've got something pretty special here, Ethan. Just the two of us, and Toby, of course." Ethan smiled. "Yeah. We do." He felt a bittersweet sense of closure. Life would never be the same without his mom or Mrs. Whitaker, but he had his dad, and together, they were enough. The days grew colder as fall turned into winter, and Ethan found himself reflecting often on Mrs. Whitaker and all the moments she had been there for him. Her absence left a void almost as profound as the loss of his mother, but it also left him with a deep sense of gratitude. She had taught him to trust his instincts and given him the courage to stand up for the truth. One snowy afternoon, Ethan approached Adam with an idea. "Dad, I was thinking about Mrs. Whitaker," he began, nervously twisting his hands. "She always said she wanted her plants to go to someone who'd take care of them if anything ever happened to her." Adam looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. "Do you think the neighbor across the hall has them?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but I thought maybe we could ask if we could take some of them. I could take care of them, like she would have wanted." Adam smiled softly. "I think that's a wonderful idea." That evening, they knocked on the neighbor's door. The man was more than happy to let Ethan choose a few of Mrs. Whitaker's plants, saying he'd been struggling to care for them all. Ethan carefully selected a small jade plant and a pot of lavender, two of her favorites. Back home, he placed them by his bedroom window, where the sunlight would warm them each morning. As he watered the plants, he felt a small, quiet sense of connection to her, as though she were still guiding him in her own way. One day, while Ethan was tending to the plants, Adam knocked on his door, holding a box in his hands. "What's that?" Ethan asked curiously. Adam sat down on the bed and opened the box, revealing a stack of letters and photos. "I've been cleaning out some old drawers," he said. "These were your mom's." Ethan's breath caught as he reached for the topmost photo. It was of Clara, laughing as she held a baby Ethan in her arms. Her joy seemed to leap off the paper. "I thought you might want to go through them," Adam said. "She'd want you to have these." Ethan nodded, unable to speak as he flipped through the memories. Some were photos, others handwritten notes or cards she'd saved. Each one brought a flood of emotions, sadness, but also warmth and a renewed sense of her presence. One letter caught his eye. It was addressed to both Ethan and Adam, written shortly before she passed away. Ethan hesitated. "Should we read it together?" Adam smiled, his eyes misty. "I'd like that." They opened the letter and read aloud. It was filled with love and words of encouragement, urging them to take care of each other and find joy in the little things. By the time they finished, both were teary-eyed but smiling. "She always knew what to say," Adam murmured. Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection to his mom that he hadn't felt in a long time. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a new sense of renewal in Ethan and Adam's lives. They had weathered betrayal, loss, and grief, but they had come out stronger, their bond unshakable. One afternoon, as they were walking Toby in the park, Ethan stopped suddenly and looked at his dad. "Do you think we could plant a tree for Mom and Mrs. Whitaker? Something that'll grow, like they would have wanted." Adam smiled, his eyes lighting up. "That's a beautiful idea." They worked together to find the perfect spot in a quiet corner of the park. With the help of a local gardener, they planted a young oak tree, sturdy and full of promise. Ethan hung a small plaque beneath its branches, engraved with the words, "In loving memory of Clara and Mrs. Whitaker. Your love and wisdom will always guide us." As they stepped back to admire the tree, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. Life would always bring challenges and changes, but with his dad and the memories of those they loved, he knew they could face anything together. The seasons passed, and life began to settle into a steady rhythm for Ethan and Adam. The tree they had planted stood tall and vibrant in the park, a symbol of the resilience they had found together. Ethan visited it often, sometimes with Toby by his side, other times alone, letting the rustle of its leaves remind him of the people he had loved and lost. At home, the apartment had taken on a warmer, more lived-in feel. The plants Ethan had brought from Mrs. Whittaker's collection thrived under his care, their greenery spilling over the edges of pots and brightening the room. Adam, true to his word, made more time for Ethan, joining him for movie nights, weekend breakfasts, and even an occasional soccer game in the park. One Saturday morning, as the sun streamed through the windows, Adam brought a stack of brochures to the breakfast table. Ethan looked up from his cereal, curious. "What's that?" he asked. "College prep stuff," Adam said, flipping through the pages. "I know you're only in middle school, but it's never too early to start thinking about the future." Ethan groaned. "College? That's, like, forever away." Adam chuckled. "Maybe. But you're smart, Ethan. You could do anything you want. I just want to make sure you have all the opportunities you need." Ethan paused, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Thanks, Dad. But I think I'll stick to passing math for now." Adam laughed, ruffling Ethan's hair. "Fair enough." That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Ethan ran to answer it, finding a mail carrier holding a package. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. "Who's it for?" Adam asked as Ethan carried it inside. Ethan squinted at the label. "Me." Curious, he opened the package, revealing a single envelope and a small leather journal. The envelope contained a note written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. "Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I wanted you to have this. I never had the courage to be honest about my past, and it cost me everything. I hope this journal helps you understand why I did what I did. Sophia, Isabel." Ethan stared at the note, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Adam asked, leaning over to look. "It's from her," Ethan said quietly, showing him the note. Adam's expression darkened, but he said nothing as Ethan flipped through the journal. Its pages were filled with stories from Isabel's past, her childhood, her mistakes, and the reasons behind her choices. Ethan wasn't sure how he felt. Part of him wanted to toss the journal aside and forget she'd ever been a part of their lives. But another part, the part Mrs. Whittaker had nurtured, was curious. "She's trying to explain herself," Ethan said finally. Adam sighed. "That's up to you, Ethan. If you want to read it, I'll support you. But you don't owe her anything." Ethan nodded, setting the journal aside. "Maybe later," he said. As the months passed, Ethan found himself less focused on the pain of the past and more excited about the possibilities of the future. He threw himself into his art, drawing every chance he got, and started joining Adam on weekend outings to explore museums and galleries. One afternoon, as they wandered through the Met, Adam stopped in front of a painting of a lush forest. "Looks like the park tree," Adam said with a smile. Ethan nodded. "Maybe one day, I'll paint something like that. And it'll be in a museum." Adam beamed. "I don't doubt it for a second." Ethan felt a surge of confidence. The hardships they had endured had only made them stronger, more connected. Together, they had created something more than just a family. They had built a foundation of trust and love that nothing could shake. And with that, Ethan knew, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he and his dad would face them together.